All right, well, always happy to take questions as they come up at other points. So tonight we are looking at Lesson 10, Diaconal Care, Serving the Congregation and the Community. And we have a few things different tonight. I figured, if you're anything like the catechism students, as the weather gets nicer, it's harder to pay attention. So we have a few props. One's going to be a video, which is maybe more lively and exciting than looking at me. And another thing is, instead of just words, I've given you pictures. So we'll walk through some charts here, which might help us if we're visual types of learners as well. Let me start with a very brief recap. Last time we began focusing on the deacon, and we looked at the form, and we noticed the form's beautiful language of how the office of deacon is meant to help us see the care and love of Christ. And what a beautiful thought that is. The office of deacon helps us see the care and love of Christ. And notice the first 2 points here. We're just going to move through them quickly, but as we center ourselves, we're thinking about, okay, what's the deacon's aim in their office then? And I've summarized it in this way. Number one is to protect the ministry of the word and prayer. And I wonder if the deacons, it's probably easy to lose sight of that. Part of my ministry is to protect or even promote the word, ministry of the word, and prayer. And how do I do that? Well, notice the text that's given there, Acts 6, is, well, with all the busyness of all the practical needs, the apostles were threatened to be taken away from the word and prayer. And so the office of deacon was implemented. And so through the office of deacon, they're actually promoting corporate worship, prayer for the elders and pastor. That's the one part. But also, they are to help the church adorn the message of the gospel with the compassion of Christ. And that's Titus 2, verse 10. We're to adorn, and the deacons in a special way as they lead the church, they help adorn the gospel with gospel clothing, with deeds of compassion. So others, they see something attractive, and that can then lead them to listen to the life-giving word. And so with the deacon's aim, we recognize deacons have a high calling, and it's essential to the church's mission. But second, and again, moving quickly, just because we're reinforcing points we've already made, notice the deacon's attitude, and it's really summarized with what this book we've been studying has been nailing home again and again, the Jericho Road, or the Mercy of Ministry, which is about the Good Samaritan. And what's the deacon's attitude then? It's this: this poor beggar has been served by the best king. What I mean is, the best deacon is the one who is daily living in the gospel. The best Christian is one who's daily living in the gospel. Someone who's aware of the bad news that we are poor and need to be served by the one whom we've despised. We're the beaten up man on the road. But the good news is Jesus, he's the Good Samaritan who through his costly mercy rescues and rehabilitates. Those are two words we're going to come back to. Rescues and rehabilitates impoverished, undeserving sinners. And third, our response then is that those rescued by Christ are being rehabilitated by his Spirit to reflect Christ's humble service to the needy in our church and community, as Jeremy read for us, Galatians 6, verse 10. So that attitude gives humility, which is critical in the work of mercy. A humility that is needed for a deacon and for any Christian because of the shame dynamics that are often there when it comes to asking for help. And it's this gospel attitude that keeps us humble and makes us helpful. Now, with that introduction, I want to ask a question, and really here's where we're going to camp out for some time, and that is, what is poverty? What is poverty? Tonight we're going to be looking at addressing poverty. What's it actually mean to serve those in need in the congregation and community? So let's get a little bit of discussion here. When you hear the word poverty, what do you think about? Someone said? Poor. Okay. Want to flesh that out a little bit? Okay, no food, no clothes, basic necessities of life. No access to basic needs. Maybe housing is included in that. Homeless, right?
Cost of living exceeds their income.
Okay, so the poverty line, right? We hear about the poverty line, but then also there's many even above the poverty line who have cost of income is lower than the cost of expenses or what they're consuming. Yeah, many good ideas. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to start with a video. It's about 12 minutes long, so you can settle in and watch it. That's okay. And it's answering these questions.
Most North Americans, define poverty in material terms. We're materialistic people, and there's some deep-seated reasons for that we're going to talk about later on. Most North Americans define poverty in material terms as a lack of income, a lack of health care, a lack of housing, a lack of food, a lack of wealth. We define poverty in North America as a lack of some material thing. Folks, this is not simply an academic question, because the way that we define poverty, the way that we answer the question, what is poverty, determines the solutions that we use to alleviate poverty. When you go to the doctor, the first thing the doctor does is try to diagnose what's wrong with you. And there's a few things that can go wrong at that moment. Sometimes the doctor will focus simply on symptoms rather than underlying causes. And folks, if the doctor does that, that's not a neutral event. Imagine if you go in and you say to the doctor, I've got a headache, and the doctor says, here, take 2 Tylenol. But you've actually got a brain tumor. Treating symptoms rather than underlying causes can actually lead to your death. Or sometimes the doctor will simply misdiagnose the causes of your problem, and they'll give you the wrong treatment as a result. Folks, notice that at that moment, it doesn't matter how much the doctor loves you. It doesn't matter how compassionate the doctor is. It doesn't matter how many good intentions the doctor has. None of that matters at that point. If the doctor misdiagnoses what's wrong with you, you won't get better, and you might get worse. We have to properly diagnose the problems. Most North Americans define poverty as a lack of material things, and so our solutions tend towards providing material things towards people. What's so interesting is if you ask poor people around the world the same question I asked you, what is poverty? They answer the question in very different ways than most North Americans do. Poor people around the world tend to describe their poverty in far more psychological and social terms than we do.
Edigbon ame no vale chan amerikum jado vivinti o.
Poverty to me like broken relations. You know,
and it made you feel?
It make me feel down. You know, I'm there. I needed help. You know, if I didn't need help, I wouldn't come ask you for help.
Living in poverty, it's like sometimes the system is set up to you to fail. Like you can't get out of poverty. So, you know, they turn, and when you can't provide for your family, it begins a frustration. So you're back in poverty, you're in this poverty mentality. It's a repeated thing. It's a repeated thing, especially if you do not have family or a good support system.
They're ashamed, degraded. They feel like nothing, like they're nothing.
In 2000, the World Bank conducted a study in which they asked 60,000 poor people, what is poverty? Their findings were documented in a report called Voices of the Poor. What they discovered is that while poor people certainly acknowledge a lack of resources contributing to their sense of poverty, their emotional and psychological conditions were suffering just as much, if not more.
I look at it from a holistic perspective because the life of an individual has several facets. But the more I have worked with communities, the more I have seen poverty deeply intertwined in people's relationships. And therefore it is not complete, for example, to say that a person is only wealthy if they have finances.
That basic disconnect between how we think of poverty as a lack of material things and how they think of poverty is at the root of the crisis that we're trying to address. We've got to get the diagnosis right. What the scriptures teach is that God is fundamentally a relational being. The Father, Son, and Holy Ghost exist from all eternity in relationship with one another. God is inherently, fundamentally relational. He's wired human beings in His image. We are wired for relationship as well. What the scriptures teach is that each human being has 4 key relationships. Our primary relationship is with God Himself. It's a relationship that's to be characterized by us seeking to bring honor and glory to God in all that we do. Our primary goal is to bring honor to Him. A relationship with ourselves, our self-image, our self-concept. Well, the scriptures teach us that we're to see ourselves as people with inherent dignity and worth because we're made in the image of God Almighty. A relationship with others, we're to have a sense of community, to love others as much as we love ourselves. And finally, a relationship with the rest of creation. Genesis teaches us that human beings are placed as stewards over God's creation. It's ultimately the case that we are managing on behalf of God Almighty. And that management entails preserving and protecting, but it also entails developing and unfolding the goodness and potential in God's good creation. Folks, what I'm arguing here is that human beings are fundamentally wired to experience these 4 relationships in the way that God intended. It's not all arbitrary. It's not all up for grabs. There's a way that God designed these relationships to work. He ordered them in a certain way. And when we experience these relationships in the way that God intended, we experience humanness in the way that God intended. We experience the good life. We create art and business and music and families as expressions of our fundamental commitments to God, self, others, and the rest of creation. We create economic, political, religious, and social systems. We create culture as expressions of our fundamental commitments to God, self, others, and the rest of creation. Folks, if you want to change a low-income community, you've got to get down to the foundations of that community, and those foundations are built upon people's fundamental commitments to God, self, others, and the rest of creation. Now, of course, the fall of humanity happened, and immediately what we see in the fall is that all 4 relationships are broken. If you go back to the Genesis account, what we read is that immediately as Adam and Eve walked in the garden, their relationship with God was broken. They exchanged intimacy with God for a poverty of spiritual intimacy. They were afraid of God. Broken relationship with the rest of creation, a poverty of stewardship. Adam is told that thorns will infest the ground. Eve is told that there will be pains in childbearing. Broken relationship with others, a poverty of community. Finally, a broken relationship with themselves. Instead of having a sense of dignity and worth and capacity, they're ashamed of their humanness. And they try to cover themselves. And because these foundational relationships are broken, the systems that human beings create are broken as well.
More than 47 million Americans live without health coverage. According to the New York Times,
Mortality rates increased in 46 states over the course of the economic recession.
We have
have seen a deterioration of political discourse.
Students are feeling like they're ill-prepared for the world after high school. We as teachers have failed them. We as a system have failed them.
Reforming public education. People are trying to
Other countries have not only failed to protect ethnic and religious minorities, most countries lack wholesome visions on how to integrate them.
And they've been victimized by racism, and they have been marginalized and sidelined, and their education has not helped them to get out. And their hope has burnt low, so that for them there is a conditioned hopelessness. That is a deep poverty of spirit.
One of the problems in contexts like this are that people don't have a self-belief from within that things can get better. Partly because they have been told that in their socialization process, partly because the government keeps on saying that Kibera people are poor. So that sinks deeply within an individual. And therefore, once you believe it, so it is.
I think poverty to me is a sense of hopelessness, that no matter what you have around you, there's something inside of you that feels like you're alone. It's maybe misery without company. It's feeling like you're trapped in a situation and things are not going to get better.
And any moment that somebody loses that sense of being important in life, then what I realize, somebody feels useless. And once you feel useless, definitely you will need to do the much that you can have in your potential. You'll undermine yourself, you'll think you're useless, you may think you don't deserve even to be part of where you belong.
You know, a staff member in Rwanda walked into a savings group we have in rural Rwanda and asked people to define poverty themselves. 1 person out of 10 mentioned anything to do with material or physical poverty. The other 90% of the answers had to do with an emotional consequence of that poverty. I feel shame. I feel incapable. I feel like there's things blocking me from moving forward in life. We can address the 1 problem in 10 that people are telling us that they have. When they say they have lack, we can say, hey, here's some money. Here, this solves your lack of money. But we won't have addressed the 90% of the problem that they really feel. I think it's a bit like an iceberg. Chop off the top, you still got the 90% under the water that's the real issue. And the same is true with people. If you're not addressing that deeper issue that's under the surface, that's not immediately apparent, you're not really addressing the situation.
Folks, if you ask the children in your church, ask first graders, what did the fall affect? They will say, everything. But something happens when they grow up, and they either focus on broken systems or broken individuals. Both are broken.
All right, there we have it. That's a 6-part series. Actually, Word and Deed uses this as part of their training. It's free. Anyone can go through the 6-part series. It's great, actually, for small groups if you're interested in that. But what you notice, I think there's many things to think about there and unpack. What is poverty? And I think we all think in material terms, and that comes out when you watch a video like that. But what this video is highlighting and what these papers in front of you, so let's turn to this one here, the biblical principles of development. Notice it has that 4 relationships on it. What this is emphasizing is that poverty is much bigger than just financial things. And so if I was to ask you the question, are you in poverty? We all are in different ways. Maybe you have no friends. Oof. Loneliness. Right? We can relate to some of these things. Shame. Broken relationships. Maybe, in multiple directions. Suddenly this makes things more personal. And that's actually really helpful for us to realize what we're dealing with is another person. Another person who is experience the goodness of God's creation and the fallenness of God's creation. And what we find here, so this is a sheet that Scott put together and uses this for presentations for Word and Deed. You'll see on the top, you have Genesis 1 and 2, and then you have the fall, and the story of redemption and glorification. And it's the gospel that starts to address all four of these relationships. And we don't have time to work through each one here, but I'll give you this, you have the sheet, and you can start to see how the gospel, yes, it restores our relationship with God, but then it starts to infiltrate all these other relationships. Just think about the letter. Let me take the letter to the Colossians. The gospel is about Christ. He's overall, he restores, brings reconciliation between God and men. But then you get to Colossians 3, and you get a restoration of self. I am now hid with Christ in God, and therefore from that place of hiddenness, I'm to put to death the things that are against God and the things that are against me, the lust of the flesh, different things like that, and I'm to put on Christ, Christ-likeness, and then it moves into the home. Husbands act this way, wives act this way, children act this way, parents act this way, and then it moves into the workplace, servants, masters, and you start to see how it actually starts to address all these different relationships. The gospel moving into a person's life starts to infiltrate all these different things. Let's go back to our handout here, our sheet that we've been working through. We're looking at the deacon's approach. In light of this, what is the deacon's approach? Our big point here is to say that our approach is to minister. We're ministering undeserved mercy to address poverty holistically. We're ministering undeserved mercy to address poverty holistically. And there's two parts to this. First, mercy rescues. There's a rescuing work that we need to do, and then there's a rehabilitating work that needs to be done. What I mean by rescuing, that means mercy will come and it stops the immediate bleeding. It sees a need, and sometimes there's not a lot of time to ask questions, maybe just basic questions, but it seeks to stop the bleeding, fill the gap. That's the short-term response. Notice on the other handout we have here, the 3 stages of responding to a disaster. Again, this is coming from Word and Deed. We have the pre-disaster section, so that's just life as normal, and then you got the lightning bolt, disaster hits. Okay, then you have the relief, right? Life has gone downhill, and relief is meeting that. That's the mercy rescuing is what I'm calling that. It's stepping in to stop the bleeding. Deacons, maybe you can think of examples of this. Maybe someone has a flood, for example, and it's like, okay, we gotta just step in and help, deal with the flood issue. Or someone has a health crisis and they end up in the hospital. Okay, we got to step in and, supply what's needed in their home. Maybe they need to make the house a little bit more accessible or something like that. We need to step in. This is the relief or the rescuing work that mercy does. It's in the first days, the first weeks of a situation. Now, an important question to be asking here all throughout is what about enabling? What about enabling? And that's an important thing to think about because it's not mercy to do for people what they should do for themselves. Now, that question starts to come up more in the rehabilitation section, the long term. But certainly what the video we watched and the mindset of Word and Deed and of the book we've been reading and of our deacons would be, we don't want to be enabling. We want to empower people to do for themselves what they should be doing themselves. Turn with me to 2 Thessalonians chapter 3. 2 Thessalonians 3. Second Thessalonians 3, verse 10, the Apostle Paul is someone who knows what it is to be on the receiving end of mercy, tremendous mercy, being rescued by the Lord. And notice how the Apostle Paul, who's been on the receiving end of mercy, speaks. Verse 10. For even when we were with you, we commanded you this: if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. That's what mercy says. Now, of course, you can see Paul, he would make qualifications for that. If someone is totally incapacitated or something, but this is his general teaching. Because he recognizes that mercy, it's not a mercy to do for someone what they should be doing for themselves. It's not a mercy to rob them of their work or their sense of responsibility to work. Okay, so that's something we need to keep in mind as we think about this. One quote from Keller is that our mercy must have as its goal the rehabilitation of the whole person. And though we must be extremely patient, eventually aid must be withdrawn if it is abused. Right? That would be enabling. Any thoughts on that?
Depends what it is, in a certain sense, right? I don't know if you're enabling, you're just helping your fellow man.
Yeah, so the immediate response is to go, we got to stop the bleeding, absolutely. And then as the days turn to weeks, you're starting to think, okay, is our stopping the bleeding actually robbing them of the opportunity to take ownership, right? And so that's a question to keep in mind. But our first impulse should be to go and help. Absolutely, to go and help.
Yeah, just a case in point, like we had a tornado go through in 1985 through Grand Valley. So we as Christian farmers got together, wagons and tractors, and we went to the village, to the town, and we worked there a couple of days cleaning everything up. Like that was the initial.
Yeah, absolutely. That's beautiful. Yeah. Yeah.
After that,
Yeah.
like we had the Mennonite relief committee there right from the beginning.
Yeah.
And so there are organizations outside your church you can use.
That's right. Yeah, and Word and Deed would do immediate relief response, right? So it's part of their giving. Sometimes they have a special collection for that type of thing. You know, there's a hurricane that hits. We're providing immediate relief. Absolutely. Kevin?
We sometimes see this, maybe this is helpful to bring up, we sometimes see this in a parenting perspective too. You know, we as teachers especially do, where sometimes a child has been diagnosed with a weakness or a deficiency of some kind. And the parents always have two responses, one of two responses. One is we have identified the weakness, now how can we target it so that they can overcome it? And
Okay.
the other response is they have a weakness, so let's not expect them to ever deal with it. So it's either an excuse or it's a focused attempt to actually rehabilitate them so that they are the most functioning they possibly can in their area. And I think that principle or that practice can be applied in more general terms too.
Yeah, and that's probably tricky to navigate, I'm sure, as to what's wisest in each situation. As it is in diaconal work, it's we can bring out the principles, but it's hard to apply them, right? I think we all just need to recognize that on the front end. That helps us then, okay, it's going to be a bit messy, but here's the guiding principles. Kevin, you...
And then sometimes as teachers we get accused of not being gracious or merciful.
Yeah.
We lay expectations, reasonable expectations on that child so that it pushes them towards development. So sometimes the definition of grace and mercy can be twisted.
Yeah.
And it just becomes permission
Yeah.
or an excuse.
Yeah, part of it is an education work, right? Like, so educating of the parents or educating and listening ourselves. It goes both ways in terms of, okay, are we understanding the full need? And then how do we educate the parents to understand our approach of not wanting to enable, but to actually empower someone to be rehabilitating. Yeah, let's go to the next point here. So not only mercy rescues, that's an important point. You see that on the road to Jericho. Jesus tells the parable of, okay, the immediate need being met by the Good Samaritan. But then there's a rehabilitation. And this aims at long-term development of reconciled stewards. And that word is being used intentionally. A long-term development of a reconciled steward, someone who's now also taking ownership. Someone who's also taking responsibility. Okay, so three things to think about here. First, it's holistic. That is what we've been saying. It addresses these four key relationships: God, self, others, and creation. It's relational. I think this is a big point. Actually, when I was preparing this, I was thinking of parenting. I think that can come up here as well. It's relational. I think this is often missed, especially if we think only in terms of, again, if we're thinking of diaconal work only in terms of financial or material things, we miss this point, right? Walking alongside with a long-term view where the process is as important as the product. And that's where I thought of, okay, as a parent, it's one thing if our child, maybe they're struggling on a homework project, and hey, I'll just do it for you quick. Okay, you got the product, but did that actually help them? No, it's probably hurting them long term. Instead, it looks different where dad or mom comes alongside and says, hey, can I help you? You start asking some questions, it gets them thinking, or have you considered this? And there the process, a relational process is being put in place where you're actually helping them take ownership, but you're guiding them, you're showing them the way forward. I mean, in terms of business, you could probably think of that too, in terms of wanting to mentor someone up through the ranks, as it were. There comes a point where I don't want to just be telling everyone what to do, but I want to help them learn how to think in that situation for themselves so that they can make wise choices. This is true in diaconal work. It's not just about, okay, can we get them the money they need? That's the immediate rescue response of what's the immediate need, but now we're thinking about rehabilitating. How can they learn skills? How can they take ownership? And that leads to the empowerment then. Helping them to faithfully steward what God has given them or given their family. You can see 1 Timothy 5, verse 4, which speaks about the family responsibility of caring for the widows as well. So that they can be part of the solution. This is quite revolutionary thinking. I think that's why we need, this is sowing a seed or watering a seed, that we need to keep sowing and keep watering. Even so recently, this is maybe a bit different, but on some of my senior visits, one of them recently, one of our seniors recommended a book for me to read because she found it a blessing. And she thought she almost felt bad recommending, the pastor should be recommending books to me, and I'm feeling a little awkward recommending the pastor read a book. And I'm like, no, that's great. You need me and I need you. That's actually how every relationship should work. You need me, I need you. I'm needy, you're needy, and we're both needed. And it looks different in each case, but think about that in terms of diaconal work, where you can start to help them think about their contribution, how they can be part of the solution. If we just give outside resources, over the long haul, it can blind someone to what they actually have, and it can make them passive. We don't want to make someone passive. We want to make them productive. Okay, maybe they have a talent or 2 or 5. How can we assist them in using that talent or 2 or 5 of them and steward it well? That's the deacon's approach. This rescuing and rehabilitating. Notice again on this sheet here, so we have the relief, that's the rescue part of the strategy. Rehabilitation is the next strategy. And then Word and Deed also adds a third one, development. I've included that development aspect in my rehabilitation. But what they're wanting to highlight there is rehabilitation gets you back to the pre-disaster level, but they want to actually go further. I would include that in part of rehabilitation, where someone becomes a steward, and now it's not like they're just back at the same level they were before, but now they're able to comfort others in the way in which they've been comforted. 2 Corinthians 1 tells us. They're able to use what they've learned to go and be useful and feed into others. That's the year-long perspective or the decades-long perspective. Let's go to our fourth point here, the deacon's awareness then. The deacon's awareness, and we could really be saying the Christian's awareness, but highlighting the deacon here. Deacon's awareness, they're sensitive to the needs and gifts of our members and community. Hey, Kevin, I covered the needs. I'm glad I included that there. The needs and the gifts, so both those things. That's the sensitivity. So be alert to needs. If you flip the sheet over, you'll see some common needs to pay attention to. Notice Appendix B. It could be someone has a sudden change in employment, where they're laid off, or companies on strike, fired, or alert to times of sickness in the family, especially if it's the breadwinner, the primary breadwinner, and they're sick. Okay, maybe they're not saying we need help, but just, I want to cultivate more. Oh, I just heard that someone, the breadwinner's sick. In my brain, I want to connect the dot that, okay, they're probably struggling right now, or they're going to be struggling probably soon. Sudden change of lifestyle, selling a house, withdrawing from fellowship, changing school, a number of different things here. Maybe even the last one, hints of hardship. If someone mentions difficulties to you as a deacon, they're inviting you to ask more questions. And this is where sometimes if you have a conversation, if you're married and your wife's nearby, she might hear things. Yeah, she might hear needs better than we hear needs. We think, oh, we're just having a nice conversation with so-and-so, and sometimes your wife's like, oh, you didn't notice that they brought this up once or twice? And, oh, yeah, okay. Sometimes our wives have better ears, that sensitivity to needs. So be alert to needs. There could be a stigma asking for help, and so that's why we need this awareness. But also be aware of their gifts. So this is how I framed it, asking, what are you good at? Instead of what are you gifted at? Because again, I think the gifting question, that leaves many of us maybe confused. Like, I don't know, what am I gifted at? But some reason, if I think about what I'm good at, like, oh, okay, or what I enjoy, maybe even better. What do you enjoy doing? Well, that's probably your gifts. You're investing into that. Yeah, it can be woodworking. It can be fixing things. It can be reading. It can be visiting. It can be talking on the phone. What a lost art that is. What do you enjoy? What are you good at? Asking this is part of the healing of poverty, because you're teaching them to think as stewards. So even just in a visit where someone's in need and you ask a question, what are you good at? What do you enjoy? That seems like such an inconsequential question, but you might actually be highlighting to them, oh, I'm a steward and God's given me things and I can start to be part of the solution. Some of our widows in our congregation, or widowers, in their loneliness, they discover they have gifts. Whether it's the gift of visiting or helping others, picking up people for rides and helping others become more included in the congregation. Some of these things they would probably not say are gifts if you would use that language, but they just do it because it's their gift. That's beautiful. Let me turn to a well-known passage, Ephesians 4:28. We've highlighted this in different contexts, but Ephesians 4:28. I think this, again, beautifully illustrates what we're after here. Ephesians 4:28. This is, I would say, a great illustration of repentance, but it's also an illustration of this principle that we're thinking about here. Look at verse 28. Let him who stole steal no longer. Okay, so you have a thief in the congregation, and you go up to him and you say, please stop stealing. Don't steal anymore. And we might say, okay, job done. Well, job's not done. Notice, let him who stole steal no longer, but rather let him work. Okay? Take ownership. You don't steal. That leads to poverty. But work. Contribute. But it goes further. Notice, but rather let him labor, working with his hands what is good, that he may have something to give him who has need. Even the thief has something to contribute, Paul is saying. If he learns how to think of himself as one who's being reconciled in Christ and able then to steward what's being given to him. He's to glorify God by working in order to bless others. And so, as a deacon, we want to help others see themselves as image bearers who are learning to take this kind of responsibility, where they have a purpose and they're able to contribute, even if it seems small to them. That's the deacon's awareness. Finally, notice the deacon's assistance. And here I'm highlighting how the deacon is not called to do all the work alone. It's something we saw with the eldership. It's something we need to joyfully embrace in a covenant community. The deacon mobilizes our members and support other ministries who help us address poverty with Christ's compassion. And so there's a mobilizing of our members, and there's a supporting of other ministries that our deacons helpfully highlight for us with the collections, but also making us aware through membership meetings and that kind of thing. But then encouraging our members, mobilizing them. I think this is something that we've been growing in. Okay, how do we think like this as a congregation, and how do we think like this as deacons to be those who are not only meeting the mercy needs, but helping our congregation to be part of that solution as well. All right, that's what I had for us tonight, brothers. And it's 3 minutes early again. I think that's 3 in a row where I ended early. To prove a point that we don't always have to go long. Yeah. Okay, any questions on that? I know it's kind of a big picture, but we've had it come at us in 3 ways. So we had it come at us through reading, through video, and through a little bit of a lesson here. So I think we can keep thinking about this. I've given you this resource, and I can share this resource as well. It's a 6-part series. I've watched my way through it. It's helpful, and they're only about 15 minutes each, so you can do it in an hour and a half and work your way through it. But any questions on this, or any illustrations you want to highlight? Deacons who have served in the past? Jeremy?
On the topic of enabling, it is such a fine line to balance that. And that's what we can be thankful for us, the plurality of deacons.
Yeah.
You can have some that are very practically minded of like, let's just get in there and do this. Or on the flip side, almost thinking too much about the situation and being like, well, they kind of put themselves in this situation. Should we really be helping as much as that or not? So it's good to balance each other out that way. You could have somebody who got fired from a job, which is awful, but maybe they got fired because they were doing something wrong. They were stealing from the company or whatever it was. How do you help that person? How do you reconcile that? How do you fix those relationships? There's things to think about. The other thing that came to mind, I don't know if you touched on it here, kind of in the empowering about the family too. Sometimes it can be also very tricky to understand how to balance how families are already helping or how families aren't already helping, and trying to minister to that, because you might be having family that's outside of your own congregation, and if the situation is like it really does fall to the family first. So how do you try to encourage that, but at the same time, as a member of your congregation, you should be providing for those needs if there's a need there.
Yeah.
Again, just hard balancing acts to follow.
Yeah, there's lots to think through. Do you want to give any answers to that, or just raise the questions?
It's more of a comment, but I think really the need is there in front of you, and as deacons and as a church family, we should address those needs.
Yeah. Like if there's an immediate need,
stop the bleeding.
Yeah.
And then you can have those conversations with maybe an extended family or whatever, or the broader community, and how they can contribute to help and serve.
Yeah. I would say that's probably should be our first step, right? Our first impulse is, okay, how do we help the need? And then it's what are the questions we need to ask, or help them start asking among themselves? And but it's not easy. John, you have a thought?
As we were preparing to move to Guatemala on our mission trip, we watched this video and others. One of the other videos really stressed how we as North Americans have a very much a fix it, get her done kind of mentality. And that can happen in the church too. We see something wrong, okay, we're gonna fix this. Rather than having more personal come alongside and maybe help them get back on their feet and walk alongside them. The kind of that get it done, I'm going to fix it type of mentality can be very, very devastating actually when it comes to like a third world country in that mindset. I know I've had that I for sure had that mentality going when I was younger. And okay, we got 7 days. Let's hit the ground running. We're gonna pack as much in as we can, and go, 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 go. And I feel good. Look what we did, right? And it's not really beneficial because when you leave, you know, okay, we got this wall built, or we came to this building. In a sense, okay, great, but who cares? It's gonna have to be painted again next year. What about the people, right? Have you come alongside them? Have you gotten to know them? Have you been able to encourage them? Those kinds of things.
That's where the lasting change comes. Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Anyway, it's kind of, especially as Dutch North Americans, it's like in our DNA. Right? You know,
It's promising work ethic.
Yeah, and it's in one sense it's good, but it's also to our detriment when it comes to these kinds of things. But, so we have to fight against that.
Yeah. I think one of our poverties is relationship. Like if we're honest about that, so the Dutch work ethic is great, like that's one of our strengths. But what's the weakness on the other side? One of our poverties is probably relationship, right? If we think about other communities that would prioritize relationship, and they would look at us and say, whoa, look at how poor they are. You know, here they are working so hard, but maybe they don't have any friends, or maybe they don't understand what community is, right? So we have to have a holistic approach to this, and that humbles us.
People went to West Virginia, and there they built up some relationships with those poor people there, and the heartaches that they were suffering. So they did the work, but they also struck up relationships, which is good.
Yeah, and most often then the learning goes both ways, or the ministering goes. I mean, as deacons too, maybe experience that. Certainly on either hospital visits for myself or senior visits, I know for sure there's a blessing that goes both ways. The other person doesn't often know it, so I need to tell them, you know, whoa, what a blessing it was to see you. You are ministering to me. And yeah, that's what relationship does, right? Okay, let's get some coffee. Is it ready, Jeremy? Yeah? Okay.